at 19 years old at the time. This was 2006, and then here's a guy who runs a human trafficking crew. He is a known sexual assault rapist. He's a murderer. He's got it all covered in life. Terrible human being. And I remember the moment he turned to me and said, "All right, now what do I do?" And I remember actually saying, because I felt so clever at the time, I said, "All right, stop being evil. That's our starting point." And I feel like that's a really good point for you. Just stop doing all the bad stuff. And I remember even quoting to him Isaiah 1:16, "Cease to do evil, learn to do good." That was the premise. Learn to do good. Plead the case of the widow. Take care of the fatherless. And about a month later, he called me back and he said, "Brandon, I figured out what I'm going to do." And I went, "Oh, this should be good. What is he going to do?" He said, "Did you know that there's Christians in North Korea?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going to go get them." I said, "They'll shoot you on sight." And he said, "I know, but what a way to go."
Welcome back to the chaotic order that all of Jesus's followers are a part of. This illustration we took from James chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. He describes the perfect and wonderful order that Jesus gave to us, but the chaos and turmoil that man has introduced. So thank you for joining us for a continued discussion on how we can get away from our chaos and get back to his order.
So today we have with us our first official interview guest, Brandon Edwards. I've known Brandon for quite a while. I think congregations where I've served have tried to hire you a couple of times, and I'm beginning to feel like you just don't want to hang out with me or something. But we appreciate you very much. I will say on a very personal note, you may or may not remember this, but after the tornado in Tuscaloosa, I think it was the day after, big church bus from the River Chase congregation in Birmingham pulls up, and there's Brandon Edwards, packed full of some helpers and some much needed supplies. And so I appreciate you very much for a lot of what you do, but certainly for that. Just generally speaking, Brandon works with Buckeyes for Christ in Columbus, Ohio at The Ohio State University. He also serves with the Called Out Assembly of the Messiah on Fishinger Road, otherwise known as the Church of Christ on Fishinger Road there in Columbus, Ohio. And I think, are you still doing Hidden Bridge Media?
Yes, yes and no. It's, whenever we have time for it and the rest. So yeah, still doing that quite a bit.
So we'll talk about more of that toward the end here, but just kind of getting us started and getting the discussion going. How did you and Kristen decide what faithfulness was going to look like in your family and in your home?
Yeah, so I've been married now. It's almost 19 years. It feels like just a year in some ways, and other times it feels like 40. But at the same time, one of the decisions we made early on was that we were going to let God guide and guide us wherever that would take us. And it's taken us all over the world, from Italy to back to the States, to lots of different states across the United States. And most of it was around the premise of trying to stay faithful, not just looking for success. Successfulness is often the metric people look at. Even in ministry, we have this standard of success, and we decided a long time ago that faithfulness was going to be our goal. Not just faithfulness to one another, but faithfulness to what we were trying to do in life, which is to impact people for Christ. And that starts obviously in the home. It starts with our kids. In fact, one of the first things she ever kind of noted to me is right before we got married was, when we have kids, I'd like to be able to stay home. And so then it was my responsibility to be able to provide for those things in establishing our home. And that has not always meant that there haven't been major sacrifices along the way. There's always been those. But for her and I, it was just an easy concept of a conviction that some things were bigger than salaries, some things were bigger than career, some things were bigger than what people would view as success in your life, but instead that it would be based around, did we serve God? That was the key component. And it doesn't mean, in fact, there's a lot of moments in time, as you might know well, where people might look and go, wow, that doesn't seem like that went well at all. Or that looked like a failure of some sort. And we decided a long time ago to never let those things become our standard. What other people interpret what happened in life, but instead that our lives would be, no matter how people might see it, would always try to be a reflection of how God works, even in the mess, even in all the things that can go wrong. So that's a long answer for a complex question, but I can really boil it down to this. I was blessed with a wife who cares more about God than about me. And that has allowed me to pursue the greatest things in life, which is to pursue my God full speed, and to see her alongside me instead of working against me or pulling me back or me pulling her back, but instead a constant journey together towards something bigger than ourselves.
That's beautiful. One of the things that we've been talking about, and when Lee came into ministry, one of the things I actually was warning him about is not pursuing the cult of celebrity in
Hmm.
ministry. You
Yeah.
know, you made reference to it. Are you in this for fame, or are you in this for the Lord? And I
Yeah.
think once you make that determination, that a lot of other things kind of fall by the wayside, and other things simply
Yeah.
fall into place.
Oh, 100%. In fact, I was asked years ago by a well-intentioned individual, said, how do you get invited to speak at all these events? And my response was, don't care, because the second you do, you're not doing it for the right reasons. And
Right.
Yeah.
believe it or not, the people who are putting on those events and the things, they feel that. They know that. And so they don't tend to invite the people who are always trying to make a name for themselves. At least most in general. I found that just do what you can do wherever you are. It's bloom where you are planted type thing, and then let God take care of the rest. And in fact, I was asked a few months ago who the best speaker in the Brotherhood was, and I said, I guarantee you, it's a guy that I do not know that's somewhere in a small church just doing his best.
That's
I
a great
guarantee you
answer.
that's the guy, because far too often we just think it's about whether or not people, the numbers or the people that might flock to that church or things of that nature. When in reality, it's probably somebody I don't know, and that
Right.
honestly gives me a lot of hope in my own preaching at times.
That is a true statement. That's a true statement. Well, you come from a family that has, and I hate to use this word in this discussion, some
Hmm.
prominence in the brotherhood. And so, with your grandfather and your
Hmm.
father as examples before you, how was all of this taught to you?
Hmm. So obviously, my grandfather was the dean of the graduate program of Bible and started the graduate program of Bible at Freed Hardman. Just passed away just a little bit, about a half a year ago, 6 months ago or so. He was one of my spiritual heroes, without a doubt. But one of the things I can always say about him, even as a missionary for 30 years in Italy, my father being a missionary, myself being a missionary, what I learned from them was I never once felt the pressure to become like them. Instead, they were both men, and continue to be both men who kept on pointing people to Jesus and pointing me to Jesus. In fact, at one point in time, I told my dad I wanted to be a professional soccer player, which was an option in Italy. And I remember him saying, "Are you going to glorify God in doing that?" I said, "If to the best of my abilities." And he said, "Then absolutely. But you better be glorifying God first and foremost." That's the reason. I never felt the pressure to become a preacher, to become a minister. Instead, it was use your talents and abilities to glorify God. That's the premise. And within that, my father obviously taught in Bible departments, but his degree was in humanities. So in art and literature, and one of the biggest impacts my father and mother ever had in life was where students would come and live with them with the Huff program and Freed Hardman and Harding in Italy for 3 months, and their lives were changed because they saw a Christian family where my father would explain art and literature and the beauty of God and how God can work throughout all of this mess and through history and the life of Paul, and walk in the footsteps of the apostles. And they would be able to see all of this and experience it firsthand. Well, that's not just a preacher. That's somebody who's sharing in life and community. And so I saw two different versions of it. I saw the preacher with my grandfather, the elder. Then I saw my father, the missionary, but also the professor, and my mom as this. She's the ultimate housewife, and I mean that at the highest term you can possibly use with that. in that every place we went became a home. And it became a home for anybody who stepped across the threshold. And so there's this beauty of what I saw of how God can work through different people, not only in the one way, which ultimately, weirdly enough, led me to pursuing all sorts of different things, from being a missionary in China, to working with underground house churches. In fact, the main reason I went to China was because it was one of the few countries my father or grandfather had never been to. That was actually my thought process was, listen, that nobody's going to hold me to their standard here, at least. And the irony was from that is that going into youth ministry and then going into now, technology and media and outreach and graphic design and whatever it may be, they've been some of my biggest supporters in these things. Never once feeling the pressure. I feel the weight of my last name, but that's something now that I find to be a beautiful burden that I'm happy to bear.
Yeah, I'd agree with a whole lot of that, Brandon. And coming into this, that was in the back of my mind, not necessarily for myself, but how many times are other people going to be comparing me to dad and expecting me to in some situations, be him, because we're in the same congregation. It's not just that we're in the same field, uh, in the same faith. We're in the same building every single day. And so I didn't necessarily feel that pressure myself, but I was kind of, I don't know if concern's the right word, but aware that it
Sure.
might be there from some of the members of our congregation. But thankfully, I don't feel like that's really been an issue. And so we've been allowed both by our eldership and our congregation to be our own people. But as long as we are first and foremost here to serve God and help other people
Yeah.
get there as well. Um, yeah, I've been married for almost 9 years now, which feels crazy to say. We've got 3 girls. The oldest one's 8. So I don't know if we can really say we're still new to parenting and being married. I don't think we get to call ourselves newlyweds, but we might claim it every now and then just to try to hang on to our youth a little bit.
Yes.
But regardless, we're always trying to learn, and when we have somebody that has plenty of knowledge and experience to offer, I certainly want to scoop up all the advice I can get. But what do you say? What kind of advice do you give to engaged or newlyweds as they're looking to start their life off together, but still as faithful to disciples to the Lord first and foremost?
Yeah. So starting off, in a lot of ways, I try to encourage people to remember what your ultimate promise is to God first and foremost. Which means, in my case, I am called to lead. There's a responsibility to lead my family, but it's also to listen to my family because I'm no longer a family of one. We're a unit in a lot of ways of and how we are meant to grow together and to push forward. So while I feel the pressure to lead, I also feel the pressure to listen and to interpret and to make the best decisions that I can alongside of my wife as we grow in faith. A lot of couples I've found don't start off with that. They start off with just thinking we're going to figure this out as we go. And then the first time there's an argument or something that happens, suddenly it feels like something went wrong. And the one thing I can tell you is, if disagreement or wanting two different things shocks you when it comes to two different people, then you may have forgotten that you're human. And that humanity will disagree at times. You're going to have disagreements on things that do not matter. And that's the key component, is being able to discern things that matter and things that don't, and learning to evaluate. This is was my greatest struggle starting off, is willing to evaluate when I would elevate things that did not matter ultimately when it came to my marriage to a point where it was a contention, and then learning to go, oh man, I love her more than I care to be right in this moment. And this doesn't affect my faith. It doesn't affect, but it could if I allow this negativity, this anger, this resentment fester. That's hurting me just as much as it's hurting her. So instead, learning to, I mean, it sounds so weird, but learning to let it go and being able to go, I care about them more than I care about being right even in this moment. But you have to discern that whether or not that thing is a matter of grave importance or not. That's the major difference, because there are things where you do need to stand firm on. There are some things where you need to say, no, we're not going to do this as a family. We're not going to, I look back historically. My father was one of the greatest examples of this, and it's a story I've shared before. But the Catholic Church obviously kind of runs Italy in a lot of ways. My brother and I were very, very talented soccer players. My brother more so than I. And the teams in the league figured out that the two little American boys didn't play soccer on Sunday mornings. So one of the years came around after my brother had scored like 68 goals in 42 games the year before, and they had scheduled like 90% of the games on Sunday mornings. And it became pretty clear to us that it was done on purpose. Mm-hmm. And our coaches were like, "Hey, what do you guys want to do?" And I remember my father, just clear as day, calmly stating, "It's as simple. They'll be there on Saturdays. It's not even a discussion point." And of course, we were at the time. I was like, "What are you talking about? We can't miss the seasons. We're like, this is terrible. This is the end of the world." And it was not even a discussion point for my father. I said, "Well, they'll be there on Saturdays. Simple as that." Now, the funny part about the story is the Catholic Church heard about this, about the two little Protestant boys were being punished for their religiosity. So the Catholic Church threatened to sue the league. And so the league went, "Okay, we'll change. And so they swapped the games around, which I find humorous now because we weren't Catholic in any way, shape, or form, but we were being targeted for that reason. And again, it was mostly my brother. That was the main reason that was the case. But I still remember clearly my father being like, it's not even a discussion point. We're not going to try to figure this out. They're just not going to be there on Sundays. Why? Because they're going to be in worship. Those types of things as a family, you have to clearly understand and set forth from the beginning. And then the rest, be flexible, learn to let go, learn to say, and the old concept of don't keep record of wrongs, like it's a biblical concept. It's a sad thing if you're constantly trying to keep track of all the things that have gone wrong in marriage and that you're going to use for a later date. You got to stop that. Instead, find all the good and wonderful things that will allow you to continue on as a family. So focus on the good, let go of the unimportant, learn to understand the difference between the two, and so much of the nonsense will fall away. So much of it will.
Right. A shameless plug. Today is my 38th wedding anniversary.
And congrats.
Thank you. If I could figure out how to do the technology of applause, now would be the time to push the applause button. But I say this half jokingly, but really very seriously. I married a very patient lady because she's been patient with me. We dated for just shy of 6 years before we got married. And then we waited 8 years before Lee was born. So we had a good long time to get to know each other. And we've made a compact with each other. We're just going to lie down quietly in our bed, hold our hands, and both pass together in our early 90s. That's our plan. We'll see how it works out. But we're enjoying life together.
Yeah.
And a lot of those things that have plagued other people, we managed to avoid because we chose not to engage in battle. And that was a mutual thing. And we even had, during the time we met and dated before we got engaged, we had friends that met after we did, dated, were engaged, got married, and got divorced before we even got married.
Wow. Yeah.
And we're looking going, wow, is this what we're getting into?
Yeah.
And we realized that what other people did or didn't do did not affect us beyond what we could learn from it.
Yeah.
And so just because I come from a family, my mom and dad divorced, that doesn't mean that I have to divorce.
Yep.
and I can break those cycles. And I think that that kind of encouragement to people is, look, just because you come from a family culture that may
Hmm.
not produce a whole lot of solid marriages, doesn't mean that that has to be your fate as well. It's a
Yeah.
conscious decision. And I think that the
Yeah.
more we can impart that to younger people, the better. But I think
Yeah.
the key that you mentioned, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a trouble-free
Correct.
marriage. There are going to be
Yeah.
problems from the outside. There's going to be problems from within,
Hmm.
and you've got to make up your mind. Okay, this is not going to lead to a divorce. Neither is it
Yeah.
going to lead to a fracture.
Yeah.
And if you make up that mind and make up your minds together, then problems just kind of fall by the wayside.
Oh, they really do. In fact, I used to tell students that come from the same background, in essence, that were about to get married, doing premarital counseling, things of that nature. That came from a background where there was brokenness and there was divorce and there was all those things. And I would say, look, we all like to rebel at times. So this is my encouragement for you to have a beautiful rebellion against low expectations. So rebel against this low expectations that everything's going to go wrong. What if God has something bigger planned for you? If you, through your commitments and your discipline and your understanding and your compassion and your sympathy, can change the outcome. We're always one generation away from greatness in the same way that we're one generation away from apathy. But the generation of greatness is a choice. But it's hard work. But it's available to all should they wish to grab it.
Certainly. We have been discussing amongst ourselves and on the first couple episodes of our podcast about how COVID has
Mm,
revealed some problems and revealed some issues. It didn't cause them. It revealed some
yeah.
issues. And so we like to kind of pick your brain a little bit and just
Mhm.
see what all and how all you've had observed this. So, what are some of your personal observations, personal experiences during and after lockdown, and
Mhm.
emerging from this, I guess, a cultural shift, societal shift in
Yeah.
our country?
Well, I kind of categorize it as a threshing floor moment when it comes to churches, especially in the United States. In the Western world, there was a wheat and a chaff moment. Whether or not you were going to church because it was just a cultural thing that you'd always done, versus um, it being a conviction that you had. Now, this doesn't mean, and this is where people love to get into the politics of things, this doesn't mean that you were the ones who never stopped going, and that's what made you faithful um, uh, in that category of things. Instead, what it means is people had to take an evaluation as to whether or not they actually believed what they said that they've always believed. And that's not a bad thing. And this is where I keep trying to remind people, yeah, COVID in and of itself was problematic. It was frustrating. I lived in the city of Wuhan for 2.5 years. So I joked, I said I was probably immune from COVID in 2007 from some of the stuff that I had to deal with there. I used to eat in the wet market they would talk about all the time. So I literally, my school was right next door to it. And so I had friends. In fact, I had Chinese contacts that were sending me when all of this was breaking out in the fall of 2019 there that were telling me about this disease and this issue. And we were already praying for the churches there. In fact, if you go back to some of my post on Facebook in like January of 2020, before it's even in like March, April is when we start seeing the shutdowns and all the stuff. I was already posting about what was happening in China because that's what I was hearing from the brothers there and the house churches and the rest that were already trying to help and to deal with the problems that were coming out of that. There's in times of great darkness, which is what I would classify COVID as, because it revealed the hearts of man in a lot of ways. It revealed those that would grab power. It would reveal those who could not deal with losing control. It revealed also the hearts of those who were just culturally going through the motions, cultural Christians. And it allowed us to view also, and I look at this and say, the average church, it's like 80% of the members came back. That's what the Barna Group and the rest have said. I always say, well, you only ever had 80% of what you had. That's just the reality. You had people that attended, but they weren't faithful. And I use the same analogy when somebody asks me, it's like, you think you're the only ones going to heaven? And I always joke, I say I'm even more closed-minded than that. I don't even think some of the people who attend my church are going to heaven. But the reason for that is because it's culturally acceptable where we are to be Christians. So you can just attend without actually having any heart transformation or physical life transformation. You can look like a tree without any fruit, and it's okay. In the same ways, you can look like a light bulb, but there's no light. And in foreign cultures where that's not the case, and this is my missionary background coming out, where it's illegal or where you're not allowed to worship freely and the rest, this is a Tuesday in their COVID was a Tuesday in their world, where suddenly your worship and whether or not you could gather were questions that you had to deal with for the first time, versus what much of the world has had to deal with for a long time. And so I look at it as, obviously there's the negative, it's the death. The death of individuals is always tragic from that standpoint. And so COVID from that standpoint was horrific, but it also revealed the hearts of man. And I just wish more of the ministers and the ministries and the elders and the churches would realize that. And instead of looking at it as a negative, our members aren't coming back, realize we weren't doing enough even at that moment to help those people through just going through the motions, just attending, to help them truly realize the beauty of what it means to be a child of God, that there's so much more to this. And so to me, it revealed the hearts of man. It opens up the doors for so many conversations. And it also hopefully gave us a little, I use the term like shot in the arm. This kind of sounds like a vaccine, but a shot in the arm to the realization of we're not okay. We've got to stop acting like the church is okay. And I don't mean, the gates of Hades is never going to overcome the church, but that the church in and of itself, we've gotten stagnant and we've gotten apathetic and we've lost out on the joy of evangelism and outreach. We've become programmatic, where everything's a program and everything has to have an event and everything has to have all these things. And we've forgotten the day-to-day life of what it means to be a Christian, the day-to-day evangelism. The best evangelists I have on campus are the students in the classes. The best people to talk to other students about Christ are the people who know them, who also know about Christ. It's not just a guy that has a title who works on a campus. It's always going to be the individuals. And when we become just programmatic and go through the motions, we shouldn't be surprised that when a pandemic hits, 20 to 50% of the church members leave. I would make the argument they weren't there to begin with. They were just filling pews. And that's a sad state, but it's got to be something we come to the realization about.
Yeah. One of the things that we've been talking about in the first couple episodes is this idea of maybe another great awakening happening, especially in the younger people. And we looked at some statistics on leaving the mega church, leaving the high church, which is what people flock to, 10, 15, 20 years ago. You're going for the excitement, going for the concerts, going for these grand things, the programs, stuff like that. But maybe that's not what people in that age group are looking for now. And some of the numbers we saw, especially with the high church world, where they were losing people of all age groups by the double digit percentile, and they just weren't replacing them. And so, I definitely wanted to ask you, since you work with that age group primarily, have you seen a similar trend of leaving that kind of establishment? And in your opinion, what are they leaving it for? What are they looking for now?
They're looking for community. And I don't mean the community that was sold to them as community. I mean actual relationships. So as an example, when I came here, coming out of COVID 2022, coming to Ohio State, there was 3 students basically. Now, a ton of clubs were dying on campus. There was like 1,000 clubs that had shut down during COVID because couldn't meet, couldn't do anything, couldn't recruit new students. I mean, so it was kind of a natural aspect of what was happening. But there was this, what I would call a reversible trend, where if you just make yourself available on a consistent basis. In fact, our entire first year, our entire motto was "We exist." Like that was it. We're here. And if you want to come and talk to someone, we're here. And so from 3 to 20 to 50 to we have about 40 that have graduated out of the program in the last 4 years, who have stayed in Columbus and stayed at the church. We now call them our young professionals in essence. And so with those students in general, I'm looking over and over again, it's people looking for relationship. Half of them did not grow up in the churches of Christ. The other half did, but they stayed. And that's unusual, even coming from a state school in and of itself. And we're seeing all over campus individuals wanting Bible studies and wanting real community because what I could say about this generation, they've been raised on iPads and they've been raised on technology, and they're not easily fooled anymore. They're not necessarily fooled by all the AI and the smoke and mirrors and all the rest of that they can sense when something is not authentic. Now, the funny part about that is I'll hear people say, well, we need to be more authentic. And I always joke, I say, you can't be more authentic. If you suddenly start trying something, you're not authentic anymore. Okay. But you have to be real, be who you are. In fact, one of my running jokes is never be prettier than you are. So never pretend to be something that you're not. And so within the churches of Christ, that means I don't apologize for being a cappella. In fact, we're the most unique worship experience out there. You want something that's community, you're going to have to come and sing and join us with this stuff. And I've never had a student have an issue with singing when they come and join us. In fact, they love coming and hearing us sing and spending time with us and learning the hymns and the rest. And so instead of always looking at it from a negative perspective, we try to look at it from the opposite and go, all right, we're the most unique worship experience out there, period. That's one of the most beautiful things that I can say. Everybody else, yep, they're going to end up sounding the same. Not us, though. Because our goal is to glorify God with spirit, mind, body, and strength, which means all of us. And so even with the young men and the young women that I deal with on a daily basis, most of the time, it's just getting them to realize what they're actually looking for. They, C.S. Lewis used to note about the fact that in deep within all of us, there's this longing to be made whole, that we can sense, in essence, like a brokenness within ourselves. And in that longing to be made whole, we put up all sorts of facades to protect ourselves. That, we're not, we'll put up something that's basically, I don't believe in God. And if I don't believe in God, then I don't have to deal with the fact that I don't actually know if there is one. And that scares me. And so having to deal with all these constant things, and I'll give you a real life situation that happened a few years ago now. I was standing in line getting coffee, and this young lady was standing behind me, and all of a sudden she said, so am I going to hell? And I turned around, I went, hi, I'm Brandon. It's nice to meet you. Like, what? And she said, well, your shirt, it says Buckeyes for Christ. So am I going to hell? And I went, I am fascinated by the fact that you think that instantly. So I'll get to my fascination with why you just said that. But out of curiosity, what makes you think I have that ability? And she said, well, you're a Christian, right? And I said, yes. But what makes you think I have the ability to send you to hell? And she said, well, I'm a lesbian. And I went, okay. Again, what makes you think I have the ability to send you to hell? And she said, well, I mean, that's what Christians believe. And I said, well, no, but let me ask you real quick. And this is a question I start with a lot with students. Who is Jesus to you? And she said, I don't believe in him at all. And I said, then I'm even more fascinated by the fact that you are worried about something you don't believe in. And then what it got to a point was when we ended up having a good 2-hour conversation on who Jesus is to me. I said, if I explain to you who Jesus is to me, I can tell you my own sins and my own failures and my own faults and the fact that I had sinned and fallen short of the glory of God that separated me from God, but God made a way home for me in spite of my sins. He provides an access to a sacrifice that can take my place. And I remember her actually turning to me and going, I've never heard Jesus explain this way. I just told it was either going to heaven or hell. And I said, well, you missed the best part of the story. You missed the part that redeems us all. And so it's not about, I don't have the power to get you into hell in the same way I don't have the power to get you into heaven. That's the other side of this, that God works in these ways, not me. We are poor messengers at times when it comes to this. And to make a long story short with all of this, with college and young professionals these days, the clear thing is there is a growth of individuals seeking spiritual depth. They're looking for purpose in life, and they're walking away from mega churches because they're faux experiences. They're seeing through it. In fact, one of the biggest churches out there, it's in North Carolina somewhere, they note that in their 5,000 member congregation, they turn over their membership basically year in and year out, with new converts and people leaving. But in fact, the average new person there, they say, lasts 6 to 8 weeks before they move on to somewhere else. And the reason for that is there's no depth. Now, that's me interpreting it. There's no depth. There's no community. It's a show. And this isn't just about instrumental music and the rest. Even the teaching is performative. And there's no real community, no real depth. So what are the best things we've done? We have Monday night dinners every Monday night for our students and young professionals here. That's provided by our members, and we sit and we eat around a table. And one of the things that I did this year is, or at the beginning of last year, I took out, we bought actual bowls and plates and silverware. And we served it on not plastic plates and the rest, but actual things. So we set tables. Do you know what people do with their phones when you have a fork and a knife? They put their phones down. And so they then started talking. And then about 6 months later, I no longer had to set the table because they were putting their phones down and spending most of their time talking anyways, because they had become part of their culture. When they sat down at the table, they would talk. Little things out there that it was just very clear to me that that's what they were looking for, was connections and community. But this could also be one of those buzzwords people use. Wow, community. It's not Sunday mornings. It's not Wednesday nights. It's little other things during the week. Monday night devotionals, Tuesday night Bible studies on campus. We have a little, at the back of our college room, we have a little section that has a little fridge that has sodas and the rest, and it has snacks. Our Wednesday nights have gone up 40% in attendance since we did that. Because students who haven't had dinner come to class knowing, hey, at least I'll have a snack. Because they're coming from classes, coming from work, at least I'll have a snack or something to eat in those moments. I'm not even sure they've realized that's why they're doing it. But it's just the small things that create a sense of community.
Absolutely. Having the opportunity to serve the Lord in a lot of different places, I know, has exposed you to a lot of things that humanity reveals, I guess would be a good way to put it. But just if you could just share any of amazing ministry moments, people that you've encountered that not only did sharing Christ with them have an impact on them, but their acceptance of Christ have an impact on you.
Sure. I mean, just one this happened about a week ago. I got a call from a friend of mine online who was like, hey, we've got a guy who wants to be baptized that's in your area. And I said, well, that's great. How can I get in contact with him and so forth? And he said, well, we just met him on TikTok. And I went, okay. Hey, that's a thing now. All right. So I had to literally try to figure this out. And so he came and met with me at the building, talked with him a few minutes. His name is Anthony West. He was baptized on that. This was a Tuesday, so a week and 2 days ago. He was baptized, and then he was there on Sunday morning for the first time in services with us. Just one of those moments where you turn around and go, I wasn't expecting that. And it had such a massive impression on me because the reason I knew people did evangelism on TikTok. I didn't realize that there was that many people doing evangelism on TikTok that was so powerful. Even podcasting, these types of areas. I was up in with your brother when I showed up the first time to Washington State. And I got there, and there was a young man that had just been baptized about 6 months earlier that he wanted me to meet for dinner. And I went to the dinner at the place, and then the guy was like, oh, by the way, I was baptized 6 months ago. I was studying with this guy on World Bible School online with a GBN also and this other stuff. And I went, oh, yeah. And he said, did you know anybody that he posted online about, does anybody know a church in Washington State? And somebody responded to him and said, yeah, there's this church called Puyallup that's out there. And I remember sitting there for a second and went, I think I was the one who did that. And so I went on back online, and I was the one because I had been invited to speak at this conference. So it was the only church I knew in the area. And when they reached out, I went, yeah, there's a church up there. And so then he went, wait, you were the one that got me connected here with the church. And I was like, I guess I was. And I wasn't expecting it. It was kind of out of the blue. And it was mind blowing to have those little connections. Now, in a personal world, in the personal life, working with college and young professionals and working down also in China, I had a young man who tried to steal a DVD player from my house once. And he had snuck in with a group of students. We were watching. I would show them movies to get them to talk about God. So I was making them watch Bruce Almighty. If you remember that movie with Jim Carrey. That was my inroads into conversations about God. Well, I had about 50 students in there. About 45 were girls, and there was about 4 or 5 guys. That was about the average for my classes in China. And for some reason, he was laughing about 2 to 3 seconds before everybody else, which instantly told me his English was way better than any of my students that I ever had in my class. And it also told me he was laughing at jokes that had sarcasm in them, and which is highly culturally odd. And I also then looked up and I said, I've never seen this kid before. And so as they were all leaving, it was like 11:30 at night. He starts to head out the door. I flip out my phone and I said, "Hey, dude." And he turns around and laughs and goes, "Huh, dude." And I went, so I grabbed my this was 2007, my Razor flip phone. Okay. 2006. Yeah. And I took a photo of him and I said, real quick, would you mind putting my DVD player back? And he was like, "Oh, how did you know?" And I said, "Well, the cord's sticking out of your backpack for one. So if you mind putting it back." And I said, "Also, you speak English?" And he said, "Yeah, I do." And I said, how'd you learn English? And he said, "Watching Friends." And I went, "The TV show?" That's why I understood sarcasm, because of Chandler Bing and all those things.
Right.
And it was a really weird moment. And I said, "Well, I'm gonna do something real quick. You're gonna come back tomorrow, and I'm gonna tell you a story. Otherwise, I'm going to send this to the police." And he was like, "Okay, I'll come back." And so I said, "I'm gonna tell you a story about 2 thieves in between a man on a cross. And then you can decide which one you want to be. One gets redemption and paradise, and the other one gets damnation." He said, "Well, I don't know what redemption or paradise is, but that sounds better than the alternate, so I'll do that." I should have been more specific. 4:30 in the morning, he knocks on my door. This is like 5 hours later. And he said, "All right, what are we doing?" And I found out he basically slept outside the whole night and never left, and came inside, and that began a 3-month battle of wills. He had a 186 IQ, spoke 6 languages fluently. He was 19 years old at the time. He wasn't at my university. In fact, I found out later he had come that night following some of the girls in because he was part of a human trafficking ring, and he was planning on abducting some of the girl students. And so a 3-month battle of wills, back and forth on questions and morality and theology and literature. And I was in Vietnam about 3 months later, and all of a sudden I got a call from him, and I call him Freddie. Freddie is the name that I use for him. It's not obviously his real name. And I just said, he said, "Brandon," it's always so dramatic. He's like, "Brandon, I've decided I'm going to become a Christian." And I said, "That's awesome. This is fantastic. This is wonderful. We've been duking it out for 3 months on this stuff." And I said, "Well, I'll call somebody, get them over to the house, baptize you and the rest." And he was like, "Okay, call me back." So like 20 minutes later, I'm thousands of miles away at this point in time. I finally get a hold of one of the brothers who's going to go over to his house, baptize him. And I call him back, and he said, "Oh, it's all good. Don't worry about it." And I said, "Freddie, this is a big deal. Like, we got to like," and he said, "Oh, I know. I didn't have time to wait for you. So I went and baptized myself." And I had to sit down where I literally opened my Bible, and I was like, can you do that? Can you baptize yourself? And I was having all sorts of feeling. I was trying to call my dad. I was like, "Dad, like, is somebody allowed to do that?" And he's like, "Well, I know you're supposed to have witnesses." So he sends me a picture of him underwater with his arm out, like taking a photo of himself underwater. And I was like, so we sent him over, still baptized him again. So I was like, I don't know if it's again or if it's the real time, but I couldn't fault his heart for who he was. And at 19 years old at the time, this was 2006. And then here's a guy who runs a human trafficking crew. He is a known sexual assault rapist. He's a murderer. He's got it all covered in life. Terrible human being. And I remember the moment he turned to me and said, "All right, now what do I do?" And I remember actually saying, because I felt so clever at the time, I said, "All right, stop being evil. That's our starting point." And I feel like that's a really good point for you. Just stop doing all the bad stuff. And I remember even quoting to him Isaiah 1:16, "Cease to do evil, learn to do good." That was the premise. Learn to do good. Plead the case of the widow. Take care of the fatherless. And about a month later, he called me back and he said, "Brandon, I figured out what I'm going to do." And I went, "Oh, this should be good. What is he going to do?" He said, "Did you know that there's Christians in North Korea?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going to go get them." I said, "They'll shoot you on sight." And he said, "I know, but what a way to go." And I went, that's not a thing. Like, you can't do that. And I got very protective instantly. And I was like, you cannot do this. And he said, and he got very serious and he said, Brandon, I love you, but I need you to get out of my way. He said, you see, I've been dead my entire life and I'm finally alive. Let me live and let me use my talents and abilities to glorify God. And so from that point to, I think today it's probably around 6,000 people that he's freed. In fact, the last time I saw him alive was in 2018 in Beijing. He showed up with 6 North Korean dissidents, and I baptized 6 North Korean dissidents in a KFC bathroom in the water trough area in a KFC bathroom in Beijing's major square there, alongside Freddie.
Wow.
You want to talk about a guy who can change his life around and how everything alters when you encounter Christ. He now speaks 11 languages fluently. He's actually gone and helped smuggle people in the Middle East. He's helped people get out of Gaza. he's kind of been all over the world. I've been questioned a few times by people asking me for information about him. Mostly people who I think just want to figure out how he does what he does. And honestly, I don't know. I always tell him he only calls me to let me know he's alive. That's really what I hear from him. And I long for the day that I get to see him in eternity. That'll be the joyous of all of the days when it comes down to it.
It's kind of interesting with him as an illustration in Luke chapter 5, when Jesus is calling the fishermen to come and follow him. He uses an interesting play on words there. You are currently catching fish, and the term he uses there is you're catching them for death. In other words, you're going to catch these fish and you're going to eat them, but I'm going to make you fishers of men. And the word he uses there means to catch them for life. And so this guy was already trained in catching people.
Yes.
He was already trained in how to stalk them and how to take advantage of circumstance and then use that for his ulterior motive.
Correct.
He's just changed the ultimate purpose in what he's done. And he's now catching people for life. So he learned a lot of skills in his evil that are probably paying off now.
Correct. And I just, it's never one of those things that they taught you in like university classes, right? Like, listen, when you have a human trafficker, here's what you do. Like, it's not a class in Youth Ministry 101 that you run across very often. But he's one of those that has changed my life in a lot of ways and impacted my own faith, because I went from being the teacher to the student very quickly when he said, I need you to get out of my way. I need you to let me live. Because my instinct instantly, and this is as somebody who's done underground mission work in China, was I need to protect this person. And he went, that's not how this goes. We can spend our entire life trying to protect everything and miss out on all the things that matter.
That's right. That's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a fantastic story. And we love hearing about that. And, part of the reason why we want to hear stories like that is, I'd be hard pressed to say that it's even possible to reach someone like that if you're just offering fluff. If you're just offering the fun and the show. But when the gospel is presented, when the body of Christ is behaving as he designed and intended, you have amazing, powerful stories like that where the love and the gospel of Jesus Christ overcomes, I think, what we would all agree is probably the greatest evil that exists in this world, and turns one of the worst people out there into a fantastic servant and warrior for Christ, who has now brought it to so many other people. And that's the importance of why we need to make sure we're doing what Jesus commanded us to do as he commanded us to do it, that we are being the genuine church that he built and bought with his blood. And we've talked about the mega churches and the high church losing people trends. The Lord's church is not immune to that either. If we are not careful and taking care to judge what we're doing, and if we're doing it effectively. And one of the things we talked about last week was we need to have the introspection in the body of Christ to say, okay, I've been doing this for a long time. It used to work, but now it's not working anymore. I need to have the humility, the awareness to say, I need to change what I'm doing. We need to alter our approach. Not necessarily saying that it was something bad in the past,
Yeah.
but cultures change, societies change, and something needs to be more effective. So we wanted to ask you, have you come across anything like that, or have you stopped doing something that you had done in the past, or maybe just began something new for that reason?
Yeah, no, in fact, it's the old statement of doing the same thing over and over and again that no longer has the same result is still the definition of insanity. It's that premise. But yes, absolutely. In fact, years ago, I've often said I love the premise of what gospel meetings used to do and what they used to be for so many in the church. And so I'm a big fan of nostalgia in and of itself. I'm an old soul. I love old things. Half of my bookshelves and worlds are old artifacts and old things. But nostalgia does not bring salvation. Nostalgia is not the gospel. How things have always been done, the methodology has always been something that the church historically has adapted well to. The problem that we've run into is that we've built so much on the premise of looking back that, and by the way, looking back as a restoration movement was meant to take us back to the first century, not 1940. It was meant to be going back beyond just those times. And I know I'm being somewhat harsh in some ways because uh, well-intentioned, well-meaning brothers and sisters in Christ, always. And so I've never found somebody who was being belligerently, no, this is the only way we're ever going to do this, that didn't at their heart really mean we want to stay faithful to God. Okay, so I want to give that caveat in a way. That doesn't mean they're right. And methodology is different than doctrine. I'm the first one to tell you, I have no desire to change doctrine, no desire to change worship, no desire to do any of those things. But the methodology of how we reach the lost has to change. I've said it before. Paul would have been on Twitter. Peter would be the webmaster for the Jerusalem Church of Christ website. Like you would have these things. They would be all things to all men that they might win even one. That this premise of somehow getting stuck behind in an era that in and of itself was all about innovation. That was the crazy part about the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. It's when we were growing the most was when we were innovative in our approaches to evangelism and outreach. I worked for the old Central Church in downtown. It's now the National Church of Christ in downtown. In 1925, they had a daycare center. 1925, daycare center for moms who were having to find jobs because of the Great Depression that was about to come. They had a dentist that came in once a week that offered free services to the community. They had a doctor who came in once a week that allowed for free services to the community. In 1925, they were pioneers of thinking outside the box. 1945 hit. 1947, they sent missionaries to Japan and Germany. Okay, think about post-World War II, the anger, the resentment, the anti-German, anti-Japan. They went, we're sending the gospel. That's a whole other ball game of mentality when it comes to it. So I go back to gospel meetings. A few years ago, I did a thing called what I call it a reverse gospel meeting. So a historical gospel meeting is you tell people in your community that you're going to be bringing in a specific speaker on a specific date, and if they come to your building, they'll hear a message that you think they need to hear. That's what it is. A reverse gospel meeting is when you say, you don't have to come here. We'll post this online, so we'll come to you. Well, it'll be recorded so you can see it as you would like. And what we'd like from you is to give us questions that you would like for us to answer. So in fact, we called it 12 questions. And 12 questions I stole the idea from Philip Jenkins and Mount Juliet and the rest. They did a fantastic thing there. I took it and kind of took it more online. And when we were in Dallas, and we made up little business cards that said, if you could ask God any one question, what would it be? And then we just set up a basic URL website, go to this, give us your questions. That's all we're asking. And you can tune in on this date. When they went to the website, it'll say, tune in on this date, and we'll live stream the answers to these questions. You can watch them recording later. And I said, I don't know if this is going to work, but guess what? I wasn't worried about success. I was thinking about faithfulness. That was the key thing. I wanted to be faithful, not necessarily basing everything off of whether or not I was going to be successful from a metrics perspective. In fact, this is the key thing that I keep trying to say where I think our churches get lost. We only do the things we think we're going to be successful in. Instead of, and this is a crazy notion, we should have ideas so big that the only way we could possibly be successful is if God is part of them. And when you start thinking in that way, this is where we end up with Louisville. So we printed up 10,000 cards, and I said, if we get 200, 300 questions, I'll be excited. We got 3,000. We got way more. And so I had to whittle it down to the top 12 genres of questions, in essence, that had come in. But I remember the first question I got was, why did God take my son from me when he was 26 years old? And I went, see, that's real pain. That's not fluff. That's not why are we different than denominations or whatever it may be. It's what are the questions the community wants to hear. And prior to the event, I also did a little thing. We had a Walmart that was about a mile from our church building. You could see the church steeple from this Walmart. I stood outside the Walmart for a day, and I asked 30 people as they were walking in, have you ever heard of this church in our area? 0 out of 30. Never heard of our area. We're a mile away. So I went and did this. 12 questions happened. I brought in, I got the questions, the genre of questions, and then I called specific speakers that I knew could actually specifically answer those questions well. So you want to talk about pain and suffering? I called Dan Winkler. Yeah. Because he understands pain and suffering in a way that I can't comprehend. There was about apologetics, so I got Kyle Butt and Eric Lyons to come in. And then there was Bruce McClarty came in and spoke. And then I also had Ralph Gilmore come in. So on different nights, we live stream it. And we also told people, you don't have to come to our building. You don't have to be there. We're going to be producing it live. You can come if you want, but you don't have to. We had 75 visitors a night. And we told them not to come. And so it felt like reverse psychology. You know, it was like reverse psychology. It was like, don't come. And they're like, we're going to come if we want to. And I was like, okay. And we averaged 700 to 900 live viewers a night. Now, since then, we've had, I think it was 2 to 3 million views since then. Now, the craziest part of all of this was kind of a 12 questions Dallas, is that I got a message from a guy in India 6 months later that was at a Baptist convention for pastors in India. And he said, we were watching one of the questions, and one of the questions was, what is the one true church? Is there one true church? And he said, we've come to the realization that there's one true church. And so we're all being asked to be baptized. And I went, who's being baptized? And I said, is this a pastor's convention? For what church? And he's like, it's a Baptist church. And I went, how many of there are you? And he said, there's like 300 to 400 of us here. And I said, so all of them they were all being baptized for the remission of sins. And then they're going home and teaching what to their congregations? I mean, it's so well outside of what I thought would happen with 12 questions. Dallas, like it just wasn't even on my radar. But God continues to work in ways well beyond what we can imagine if we would just get out of his way long enough for him to do those things. But instead, we plan our budgets on the idea that everything has to be successful. Instead of it being, okay, are we being faithful with the gospel? If we're being faithful with the gospel, and this doesn't mean waste, this doesn't mean excess, but it does mean, are we only doing the things that we think we can do? Because if that's the case, then do we need God at all? And that's our problem at times.
Absolutely. Understanding who people are and where people are in the given moment is something that's so important. Mm-hmm. You were talking about the 1920s, 1930s, in that era. I was not born then, just for the record. I kind of came into an awareness of the church community when I was in the 5th grade. And that was simply because my dad was transferred out to the desert in California. And just that time frame, my brain started clicking into more religious things. Well, that was a really weird period of time because my dad was in the Marine Corps. He had served in Vietnam. You had the hippie movement, which was very misunderstood, still is. But you really had the mamas coming out of World War II, and then even Korea going, we don't want this to ever happen again. Yeah. There's been all this violence. There's been all this pain, and the pendulum swung the other direction. Okay, it's only peace and love. And then we were having
Yeah.
that great conflict in our country about the Vietnam War. And here we were emerging out of that. The church could either turn its back on this reality and do a proactive judgment. Oh, they'll never make a good Christian. They'll
Mhm.
never hear the gospel, accept the gospel, or we can embrace the cultural ebb and flow
Mhm.
so that we can understand how the gospel impacts those people instead of deciding and predetermining the gospel cannot change that
Correct.
person. And so I watched as in my formative years some really strange things, and I made some terrible decisions as a result of it.
Mhm.
But one of them was the sexual revolution that
Mhm.
had come out, the easing of no fault divorce
Mhm.
coming into a reality. And there was actually a minister where we were in Louisiana that all but encouraged my mother to leave my father on the grounds that because he went away to Vietnam, because he was sent away to Okinawa, Japan twice for a year, he had abandoned the
Mm.
marriage and he had
Mm.
abandoned our family. And so, all of these realities, the church is trying to conform to the culture instead of presenting the
Yeah.
gospel to the culture and understanding that. And so, I began the process of rejecting what I had been taught,
Mhm.
looking for something else, and lo and behold, end up re-embracing what I had been taught as a child. It took
Yeah.
years, but re-embracing it. Well, by this time, culture had really changed.
Yeah.
And the reason I share all of that is we all are that product of our experience. But yet the constancy is in fact the gospel.
Mhm.
And the gospel that applied to me as a wayward teenager is the same gospel that applied to me as a guy in my mid 20s that was trying to come back to the Lord,
Yeah.
and understanding that that same fundamental truth applied. And so
Yeah.
if we're willing to accept that we change over time and
Mhm.
that the gospel is a constant and has application to us regardless of how we're doing, we need to give other people that same opportunity as well. And I think
Yeah.
that that's been a hang up uh, with people, is not having a willingness uh, to uh, to share the same gospel to a different audience that is going to consume it in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I use the terminology, and it's not original to me. Brady Shearer does a lot online in this, and he speaks about we're dealing with the greatest communication shift in 500 years right now, from the printing press and everything that came in to where, with the internet, with the outreach that we have the ability to do today, we're communicating differently. In fact, I joke with my students, if I tried to call one of them probably might have an anxiety attack if they actually had a phone call that came through on their phone and not just a text message. Why? Because they communicate differently. And this is no different than any generation, really. And the church should, and as you kind of noted, my father always used to say, you need to have your thumb on the pulse of culture. You're not driven by culture, but you need to understand it. It's, in fact, it's somewhere, I want to say it's Second Kings, where it notes the premise of, and these men who understood the times. And that's where we have to be, people who understand the times. So, for example, we're using technology and media in this very medium right now because this is where so many are. It blows people's minds when I tell people that the average community church sermon in the United States in 2025 was 52 minutes. And we have some members who complain if you go 23 when you're supposed to go 22. Why? Because we are conditioned by sitcoms that told us that everything in life is fixed in 22 minutes, because that's literally where that comes from. The idea of long services, or that something is different than what it once was. And I just want to remind people, hey, gospel meetings used to last weeks, not just weeks, and they would sit there, but people had time and they communicate differently in different methodology, different manners. Um, I jokingly did this a couple weeks ago when I was speaking in Dallas at a conference, that I quoted myself from a seminar that I did in 2019 or in 2017. I said by 2020, 75% of all media and social media will be video. And then in here I was quoting myself back then, stating I was wrong. It was actually 86%. It was actually way higher. And that's where we are. We're in video and the rest. If I told somebody that today the number one podcast in the world, the average episode lasts 3.5 hours, and yet many of them still believe that most of this generation don't have an attention span. They have an attention span for the things that matter to them. That's the key component. And so even in writing, I always tell people writing is a lost art form, and especially on social media and the rest. They're pithy, or they put out little statements or put out things, and then they'll get great reactions and engagements, but it doesn't do what actually needs to be done. And I don't know, y'all probably don't follow me on social media in general, but one of the things I try to do all the time is I just try to get people to think. That's the key component. In fact, one of our first podcast episodes is a statement from George MacDonald, G.K. Chesterton, and C.S. Lewis, which goes, feelings, feelings, feelings. If only I could get them to think. And that's kind of where our culture is right now. Everything is based off of how I feel. Everything is an emotive response to everything. But if I can get them to think and to realize that feelings lie to you, and that in fact, I'm known for saying to my students all the time, never forget that no one lies to you like you lie to you. No one does. You lie to yourself all the time, where either you're the worst at everything, or you're the best at everything, or nobody cares about you, or everything should revolve around you. When in reality, it goes back to the very much in the garden. It's the beginning. Did God really say? It's just that little doubt, one way or the other. It's you could become like God. Or did God really doesn't he kind of keep these things away from you? And this deception that's happening around us consistently, especially culturally speaking, is something we've missed out on. We've misinterpreted so much of what's happening around us in culture. And if the church can get back to keeping its thumb on the pulse of what's happening, and instead of being reactionary, we become visionary. That's the key. So I had a church that called me because I was there from 2015 to 2018, and I told them we need to set up, we need live streaming, all this needs to be set up, needs to be done. And they were like, there's no real need for this and so forth, but we did it. And then when 2020 hit, I got a call from one of their elders and went, thanks. We were ahead of the times for once. And he meant it in jest, but he also meant it honestly. He was like, we weren't having to react instantly. We had all the infrastructure already set up to deal with whatever might come ahead of us. And we've got churches that are live streaming our services right now because they're still reeling, trying to figure out how to get caught up with what was basic technology from 15 years ago. But they just weren't keeping up with what was happening in the culture. And I think we have to be on that cusp. It doesn't mean you have to be trendy. You should stay away from trends, but you should stay close to that which is becoming part of our culture, part of our society. And the Pandora's box of technology is open. It's not going back. We're there. And so we need to embrace that and understand it, and then utilize it in appropriate context and ways to glorify God in all things.
One of the struggles that we have is the opposite side of that. We had at Timberlane, we had talked about live streaming. In fact, we had talked about it for several years, and some of the infrastructure was in place, but we had just not pulled the trigger. So lockdown happens. We had a brother here. In fact, he was helping us with our technology last night. But he got us up and going the very first Sunday. And I'll never forget that Sunday because I had never preached in that manner. And we literally had a laptop computer that I had just purchased that week for this purpose. We turned it around backwards. We had maybe 15 or 20 people in the auditorium, but I wanted the brethren to see people behind me. Well, pause right there for a second. The week before, I had actually come down with the flu. And so I was sick. And so I missed the Sunday before the lockdown. And so I wanted to make sure that I reassured the brethren that I did not have the coronavirus COVID. And everything. So all was going to be well. Well, nobody turned the AC on at the building because the AC guy wasn't there, right? You know, every church has its AC guy. So I was sweating profusely as I get on camera to live stream this first lockdown sermon to reassure my brothers. I looked like I was dying from the coronavirus. It was exactly the opposite
Yeah.
impression. But in that moment, we all had to figure out how we were going to utilize this new thing that really wasn't so new.
Yeah.
But one of the unintended consequences of this, in some ways, we did it too well because we made it too easy
Yep.
for some people to stay home.
Yep.
And some of that is the 20% that you said earlier, you never had them in the first place. And I get that. Some of them, 100%, there's a legitimate need, shut-ins, et cetera. This is a
Yep.
whole lot better than a CD-ROM
Yeah.
to be able to still be a part of it. But we have an audience out there that
Mhm.
we've made it too easy to relax their spiritual side, to consume the product that we're putting online, and not to engage in the life of a disciple.
Yep.
I'm sure you've experienced that, so I'm going to ask you, have you seen that? How do you deal with that?
So one of the things, in fact, there's a church that does it really well, and I couldn't remember the name off the top of my head, but they have an intro video that goes in at the beginning of all their live streams that specifically states, "Welcome. We're so glad you're watching online with us today. We just have one thing that we encourage you in. May this be something that is supplementary to your spiritual life and doesn't replace the God-given church family that you are called to participate with and be live with in worship. So if this is something where you are housebound and the rest, fantastic. Otherwise, can we encourage you to make sure you connect where you need to connect, that you get into the church family where God wants you. We want you to be with us. So come and join us live. That's what we would ultimately like to see." And that's how every live service starts. It's a reminder to the viewers, if you're watching this, if this is supplementary beyond what you normally would watch, and you're watching this because you're studying or growing, awesome. We love it. So excited for you to have you with us. Otherwise, may this not be a replacement to what to the church that you need to be plugged into physically and the rest. Now, the other side is this. I would say a church that does community well, you don't usually have to say this to. A church that has those connections and the rest, you're always going to have outliers. I always say this. You're always going to have that one that's like, well, I don't really feel like I connected in. I always tell people, the church is filled with weird people. It's supposed to be. So there is no perfect 100% solution where everyone always feels like they connect or feel plugged in, because sometimes you're just going to have ornery people. And you do the best you can with all of the ornery individuals that there are out there in life. But you do everything you can to make sure that they know for your desire for them to be with you in person. That's the key component. That's why I always love that. It's something I want to set up. I just need to record the video for even where we're at. May this be supplementary to your spiritual growth, that it does not replace the church family you need to be plugged into and participating with on each Lord's Day. And we hope even during the midweeks and the rest. So that's one way from a video perspective. Live perspective is, when they come in, do you have a plan for them? My grandfather used to say, visitors are unwelcomed. Guests are prepared for. He used to say, a raccoon is a visitor, but I do not want him there. A guest is someone you prepare for. So you have plans for them. You have people that are, whether they're ready to greet them, and it's not just a greeter team. It's that you know where to plug them in, that you have clear signage to where bathrooms are, where they can find out information about Bible classes if they have kids. That's where a guest, I hate using the term guest experience, but if they're not a member of the church coming for the first time, is it clear where they're supposed to go and how they're supposed to connect? Because the church has made a preparation for that. That's how you'll build community. That's how they'll feel like they're wanted and desired. Otherwise, I would, find a way of making a short intro video to all your live streams to simply say, love that you're here with us today. If this is your only way of meeting, then we're glad you're here with us. But other than that, we hope you'll come and join us in person.
Wonderful. It's simple,
Yeah.
but that's wonderful. The interesting thing that I guess, experienced coming out of the lockdowns. Tallahassee, uh,
Mhm.
our governor, our government was a little bit at odds. The state was opening up, but our city
Same
was
in
a little bit
Ohio.
slow. But okay, and so we had that conflict. Do we do what the
Mhm.
government's saying, or do we just throw the doors wide open? But I was very positively affected and impacted when we were given the quote unquote permission to open up and come to 25% capacity.
Mhm.
Number one, that first Sunday we exceeded 25% capacity. But the most amazing thing was to see the smiles on the faces of the people that came through the door.
Mm.
Because the reality was, we had no idea if anybody was going to show up.
Mm. Yeah.
Because if their mindset was, well, we're only supposed to be 25%, so I'll stay home, versus, hey, we get to go. There was a strong desire for people to come back into
Yeah.
in-person community, in-person worship together. And I will never forget what that was like when people were deprived
Yep.
of that for a relatively short period of time. Well, we went through the reopening process in June of
Mhm.
2020. So we had several months. But there was just that desire to be with the body of Christ. And I think that is something that we have to make a priority, not only as you were talking about reaching out to and preparing for
Mhm.
guests, but the preparation of the disciples of our
Yeah.
Lord for another time when we cannot be together. We better be preparing for that now,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
that when that time hits, when the next pandemic or some sort of disaster happens,
Mhm.
that we are ready, our people are ready.
Yeah, having contingency plans is never a bad thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, I know you've got 3 kids. Lee's
Mhm.
got 3 kids. I am correct, right? You're still
Yes.
that.
I've got
Okay.
3,
I want to make
17,
sure I get.
10, and 10 and 8.
Oh boy, life is really exciting at the Edwards home.
It is. It is. I'm surprised you haven't heard them bounding up and down the stairs around here, so
The idea of preparation is something that I think is at the essence of what we do in ministry, but it should be at the essence of what we do as Christians. We are
Mhm.
disciples that are making other disciples. And one of the decisions that Kathy and I made when we had kids was to understand we cannot protect our children from the world.
Mhm.
What we can do is prepare them for the world. And we had no idea how major of an event that was going
Mhm.
to put into our lives, and how we were going to really be tested in that with Lee's injury. But it was a realization that this world is out there and it's a tough place.
Yeah.
And if we don't prepare them in our homes, and then in a supplemental sense in the congregation,
Mhm.
the congregation can never replace the home, but
Yeah.
but the preparation for what comes next is something that we need to make a part of who we are, as not only as Christians but as Christian families, in raising up the next generation. And so that ongoing need. I know that the population that you serve, in the community that you serve
Mhm.
in, the not only the educational community but the college
Mhm.
age community, is such a critical time frame that
Yeah.
we've got to make sure that we are preparing people before they get to you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that puts an extra
That would be
burden
nice. I
on
would
the home
appreciate that
congregation.
more. Yes. No, I think you're spot on when it comes to it. The reality is so often people look at college as almost like this abyss of darkness that you hope your kids crawl out on the other side of, from a faith perspective. And even going to a Christian college, I can't tell you how many times people have say, um, "Well, my child left the faith when they were at the college," and I always go, were you expecting that Christian college to be able to withstand all things? I mean, it's almost like Satan doesn't exist, or that there's not. And so I want to be fair. It's not just a state school or a Christian school even. There is an aspect where these young men and young women are becoming something on their own. They're stepping out on their own. In fact, one of the things I use all the time is that college students are between the no longer and the not yet. They're no longer in high school. They're no longer in their family's home, but they're not yet where they want to be. And so there's this aspect where it's a concept of liminal space. It's between the no longer and the not yet. It's like a hallway. And I always tell people, no one lives in a hallway. You're going somewhere when you're in a hallway, but you can't go back, and you've only got to go forward. And the decisions that you make in that hallway alter everything, alter all the things that you do. And so it is the greatest time for decision making about who you are, your character, your development, and all the rest. Now, as I've noted before, it's great if you've made those distinctions. As I noted about my father, there was going to be no question, no conversation to be had about whether or not we were attending soccer games on Sunday mornings. It had already been decided long before the question ever arose. They're going to be in worship. And so even students, that's the number one thing I think it starts with. If you can teach your children coming out of going into college that not attendance at church, but presence and worship. Those are two different things. A lot of people teach their kids to attend church, but not to have presence and worship. To be present in worship at the local congregation, wherever they might go to college. One of the things that the Buford Church, when I worked in Atlanta, used to do, and I loved it, is on graduation Sunday when students were leaving to go off to college, it's like the second or third week of August. I started noticing that there was an elder or two that always seemed to be gone on those Sundays. And because we had at one point in time, I think 6 that went to Freed Hardeman at the same time. Well, I found out later that elder was in Henderson with the parents, meeting the elders of the local church to tell them, these 6 are with us. We're giving them to you for 4 years, but we expect them back. And there was almost like a handoff of things. And the parents even noted it at one point in time and said one of our elders was there specifically to introduce himself and to the elders at the church there in the local church, and to make sure that the 6 kids knew, hey, these are from our church. We want you guys to plug in. That mindset, and I was like, it wasn't planned. Nobody was planning it. It was just something that elder had decided was going to happen. Then I found another one was at Harding, another one was down at University of Alabama, and one was over at University of Georgia. And they were there where students were because they cared about the development of these individuals, and they wanted them to say, you will not be able to say, I don't know where the local church is. They're going to take that away. They're also going to take away this idea that you can just kind of not show up and nobody will notice because there's somebody now looking for them. So small things like that. I had a young lady who came yesterday to visit campus, who's a junior in high school, whose mother came to view and look at the entire ministry and visited last night in Bible class with us because she's preparing her daughter to look at the universities to see what churches are in the area and how they might get plugged in. I can't help but commend individuals who are thinking that far ahead about their child's spiritual life outside of their home, outside of what will be. And that also tells me that there's going to be no such thing as that mom who doesn't care about that child enough to drive across the state on a Tuesday and then a Wednesday just to have her visit a year and a half before she's going to be even stepping foot on campus, to connect her with the minister, with the church, with the class, with the students, introduce her and say, this is her. I want you to know her because I hope you'll see her again. That changes everything because the mentality is, I think, a preparation for their child to be in heaven, not just a preparation for them to get through college. I want parents to look at, like, if they're coming here, that they're excited that they're going to be part of something great. That's my goal, that they're not just going to college and let's hope they make it out. That instead they're going to go to college and they're going to grow in their faith and they're going to learn what it means to make good decisions through this time period. Doesn't mean perfection. It means progress. There is no perfection in college years. It just does not happen. But I tell the students all the time, wake up tomorrow thanking God you weren't the person that you were the day before. And that means there's progress happening. I thank God today that I'm not the same person I was yesterday, and I'm going to do better each and every day.
And another question that we had asked last week
Mhm.
was a congregation needs to be able to ask itself, are we training attendees or are we training disciples? Just like how
Yes.
you mentioned it. And so when you're looking at that, especially with our younger um, members, whether that's the college age or in the youth group area, you've had time in both of those. You've
Mhm.
seen those transition points of moving from high school to the next age group, and now moving from college to the next age group. Each of those are very precarious situations, and if it's not handled well, you're sending a kid from a very close and well knit group to
Mhm.
essentially nothingness if your church is not prepared to handle that transition. And so, as those kids are moving up within the assembly, there, what are some good practices for the congregation to integrate those youth into the happenings there, so that they aren't simply attendees, but they have an actual presence with the body?
Yeah. So, youth ministry is a whole different ball of wax. I really love college ministry. I haven't had to sign any parents' permission slips in years now, and it's been awesome. They're all technically, let's call them adults, but youth ministry in and of itself has shifted quite a bit from what it has been. And it's not yet where it needs to be, because youth ministry in and of itself should revolve around the premise of being a helper to the family. And so while I'm not a big fan of just playing games with names, like, he's a youth minister, no, he's a youth and family minister, that's kind of problematic at times. I'm definitely glad to see us having moved away from just the youth ministry as glorified babysitter, where it's pizza and Xbox, and that's kind of the expectations. I've seen more and more youth ministers get into the concept of education, like actually doing education being the main thing. So for myself, when I was in Atlanta, one of the key things we focused on was the education program. I was blessed with 30 plus men who could teach well, when it came to and related to our college classes, and our high school classes. And so one of the things that we did was, we're going to try something different here. Instead of doing it by grade, we're going to do it by topic. And so I turned it around to the teachers, and I said, if you could teach anything, give me your top 5 things from each one of them. And they sent in a list, and I had every single book of the Bible except for the book of Malachi. Somebody, apparently, we don't care about that one. And then I had about 60 to 100 other topics that had come through. And then what I did was, I looked at a 7-year span from 6th grade basically through 12th grade. And I simply said, how can I get all of these students to go through, or have the choice to go through, every single book of the Bible in some format, and or these topics that are relevant. And I'm going to put each quarter, we're going to have 6 classes, and then we'll have 3 that are topical and 3 that are scriptural, textual. Because what I found is that some 7th grade girls had more maturity than 12th grade boys, and some
Yes.
9th grade boys had more mature than some of our 12th grade girls. And if you give them a choice, everything kind of changes. Because all we asked the students was to commit to a quarter, commit each quarter to a class and attend. And I had a lot of people, people's going to go after their favorite teachers and only going to sign up for certain classes. And I found that to not be the case. In fact, our attendance went from 74% on average on Sunday mornings to 96%, because the students were choosing. Now, here's the opposite side. You know what it did for our adult attendance? It went up too, because they had to drive their kids to classes that
Yeah.
they all wanted to attend. And so
Yes.
it also created little communities where our teachers, and because I kept on telling them, I love when students have a favorite teacher. It's fantastic, because it means that they learn from them. And so we were able to then invest. And I said to the teachers, your job is to make sure that the ones who show up each week feel connected to what you're teaching and to you within the family and the body of Christ. It shifted the mentality of youth ministry to education based, to answering questions that students had, to what they might desire or want. And that changed for us. We went from 35 to 40 kids, to, when I left 2 years later, it was about 145 in the 7th through 12th grade. And the kids were the most evangelistic kids I've ever been around. They baptized over 50 kids from the community in those 2.5 years. I mean, just fantastic outreach. Why? Because they were invested in what was happening, and they were bringing their friends, and some of those kids are now youth ministers, and they're now ministers at other churches and the rest. And it's fascinating for me to turn around, and they'll call me and go, wait, how in the world did you get any of us to show up? Because I can't get by it. I keep telling them the faithfulness of God. That was all there was to it at those times. So that's the youth ministry side. When it comes to the parents, one of the biggest deals is that I tried to hold parents up to a higher standard. And this is what I keep trying to tell you. A youth ministry and family ministry at time seems to lower the bar of expectations because we keep giving everybody excuses for things instead of raising the bar of expectations. Teenagers, I used to tell them all the time, I'm never going to be surprised when you act like a teenager. I promise. But my goal is to get you to act like an adult. That's my goal. And so I remember doing a class. We did a whole entire class walking through Mere Christianity. And some of the parents told me this, like, I can't even understand Mere Christianity. I went, okay, that's another conversation for another day. But why would you assume your child cannot? Well, no, let's raise the standard and expectation. We did a whole, one of the classes, one of the years we had Revelation, Daniel, and Genesis were the 3 textual studies. And they went, oh, those are way too hard for these kids. And I went, or challenge them. And the expectations kept on rising and rising. And it's the same thing with college students here. Raise the standard. We have got to stop coddling people in a lot of ways theologically, what they can and cannot know. We've got to stop just giving them the answers. This is bad. This is wrong. No, you've got to do the hard work of showing them, all right, what does the Bible say about this? And let's show how we arrive at these things, how we arrive at these conclusions. What do you think about that? Sounds good in essence in a conversational class, except for when you say, what do you think? What are you giving preference to?
Opinion.
A personal opinion of things and feelings, and not with, and it's not necessarily just saying, well, what does the Bible say? It's also what is true? What do you know to be true about this? What could be problematic? It's teaching people to think, not just what to think. And those are the 2 arenas. And in fact, I encourage youth ministers all the time, college ministers. Are you getting students to think? Are you teaching them how to think? Because that's going to be of great value to them as they go into college, as they go into the rest. Because that first Sunday when a friend invites them to a church that it's a denominational church and they go along with them, they get there, if their first thought is, well, this is just different than what I've done before. Well, there's nothing wrong with this. Seems like great people. Well, it's a whole different kid if they go in there and they go, why do they do this? What is it that's happening right now? Is this something that I know from the Bible? Is this something that's good for me? Because now you've taught them to think, and they can then process those things and make decisions based off of informed concepts instead of just reacting to everything.
And the reaction, the preparation is something that has to begin in the home.
Yep.
And I'm going to give you 2 sides of this coin. Number one, in Tuscaloosa, after the tornado, I'm sitting in my office one day and I got a call. I normally did. Parents would ask questions about Tide for Christ, and with no church building, it's an interesting question. What do you do? And so I would either talk on the phone, I would meet, for a few minutes and talk to people. Well, I got one phone call from a family that was coming with a prospective student at the University of Alabama, and they wanted to see what we had to offer. And so we kind of have, joke, I can give you the open air tour of a church building that may be at one day. And so I met with them, talked with, I ended up spending the entire day, had some great full moon barbecue, which, the bond of Christians over barbecue is
it's paramount. It's paramount. It's very big.
And I spent the day with them, and fast forward a couple of years, the young lady had gone to the University of Alabama, and I get a call from my son telling me that he's dating that young lady. And I'm the beneficiary of a set of parents who did a good job preparing their daughter to come to college.
Yeah.
The other side of that is that this guy sitting here talking to you right now, I was not prepared in that way. My parents had divorced. My dad lived across the country. We lived in North Carolina. I went to the University of North Carolina, and I went to one FCA meeting in our dorm early in my freshman year, and that's it. I did not attend any worship service, any Bible study, nothing. I immersed myself in the college life. for mostly the bad side
Mhm.
of that. I was on my own, and there was no checking up on Lee, and Lee was trying to figure life out,
Mm.
and I understand how that feels. Where
Yeah.
understand the impact that had on me of a negative way, and I don't want to see another kid go through that.
Yeah.
Um, I, but for the grace of God, I'm sitting here now. It could have turned out a whole lot worse,
Yeah.
and I'm
That's
very
that's
grateful to God.
yeah, that's the side of things that I think
And
we forget at times is that C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters. There's a fascinating one of the letters that he writes where he notes where the demon is praising the fact that a bunch of people have just been killed and how wonderful it is that they're finding death. And he said, "You don't understand. Death is not the end for those who are in Christ." But then he also turns around and says, "No, we want them to last as long as possible because even the Christians, we want them to live a long time because maybe then they'll turn away from God." And so we don't want just death from them. And that's where I remind also students who have gone through and parents who are, a child is walking away from the faith and the rest. I always tell them, I said, don't give up. Keep going. You never know. You never know how things will change for them in the future when they come back to the realization of these things. And I've seen that over and over again. People that I've seen people give up on, and then 10, 15 years later, I turn around and they're back faithful to the church and growing in their faith and the rest. And they've had some hard times. So we have to be careful that we don't fall into this woe is me, everything is terrible all the time, and not realize how many transformative stories there are of people working where God works in the mess of life and that God can restore and change. So, Freddie, yourself, and others that have gone through, while it may not be my story, I see that story all the time. I see that narrative all the time. And God works through people, all of the people, messy people. I even note at times, David would not be hired to be the worship leader at any of our churches. Why? Because they would look at his background and go, I'm sorry, you had a guy killed and then took his wife? Yeah, it's probably not a thing. Now, the problem is because that's the way we view things through our eyes. We forget the redemptive power of Christ. If Freddie were to show up at a church and, it sounds great to have him come and speak at a church with an event, and I go, guys, do y'all realize if you actually stopped for a second and thought about his background, you would probably all go, if he was an American, you would go, I'm sorry, he's a serial killer who raped a bunch of people? And we're going to put him up there preaching? Are you kidding? And it's because it's our mentality that we've forgotten the redemptive nature of God about how he works in the mess. Those are not proof that there is evil in the world. That's already there. It's proof of God's redemptive power in the world to overcome that evil. And that's the stories at times that I feel are so missed out on, is how God works through those things. And even those who, myself, I tell people, well, the hardest part for me in my faith has been that I felt lost for so little time. I was 13 when I was baptized, April 19th, 1996. It was about a week that I really had that realization. And the hardest part for me is my own pride and my own arrogance that I don't have that story like others. And I wasn't that bad. And I wasn't. And then I have to remind myself, my sin separated me from God. Who am I to stand before anybody and act like I'm not just filthy rags when it comes to that? And so while there's the story narrative where you might look back and have shame on your own story that God has redeemed, and so let go of that shame, there's also the side of it is, well, there's my pride and my arrogance. Well, God got rid of that. So get rid of the pride and the arrogance. Humble yourself before God. That over and over again, when we can remind ourselves of these stories, it should give all of us hope. All of us hope for the future and all the things that we do. We are imperfect vessels. It was my father used to say we are, beggars, former beggars helping other beggars find bread and show them where we found bread. That's really where we are.
That's good. I like that.
Yep.
All right. So we had a great conversation and we really appreciate you being here
Mhm.
with us. I got one more question for you. And this is beneficial for any congregation that's listening or any parent of a young teenager that's listening, but also for myself, a little selfishly, somebody who's still new into youth ministry. Again, just looking to pick the brain of anybody with good experience and advice to offer. So if you, with the benefit of hindsight and all the knowledge that you've gained and your experiences, if you had to start all over, go back to youth ministry, new congregation, new state, how might you do things a little bit differently? What might you do that you didn't do the first time around,
Mm.
so that you are better preparing these young people, these teenagers, not just to leave your youth group, but to be functioning adult servants as they should
Y-
be?
Yeah, so a fascinating question because this is ironically a question I literally ask youth ministers all the time. In fact, my opening question to them is, "Hey, if you could start over right now, would you?" And a lot of them will think through different things, and they'll go, "Well, I guess so." And I'm like, "Then why don't you? Like, start over. Like, just start over."
That's
And I'm saying not move or anywhere. I'm just saying, what would it look like for you to go? Is what we're doing working? And it's not just the working aspect. Is it having the impact that we want it to have? So if you were to start, I love doing what's called dream casting in essence, where you start with a blank wall. I have a wall that's an idea wall where I can write all over it with markers and the rest, and then it washes off. And so start with that. And then the only thing you can do is you cannot say anything in the negative. You cannot use the word no. You have to start every next sentence with yes, and that's the whole premise. So you start off with, okay, so we want parents to be involved. Yes, and we want teens to be spiritually fed. Yes, and you kind of roll from that. If I were to do something from the beginning right now, this campus ministry I came into, in essence, that's what I had. Because coming out of COVID, everything was kind of dead. It was dying. We had a 20-year-old student center, which was kind of the old way of doing campus ministry in general. And I shut it down. Now, there was a couple of reasons I shut it down. One was because it used to be a great location. Now it was next door to a bar, and we shared a bathroom with a bar. And that just wasn't conducive to a lot of girls hanging out at the place at all. It was also next door to a frat house on the other side. So we had a frat house and a bar on the two sides. Just wasn't conducive to safety in general for some of our girls, which is why we were 95% guys. That's where we were. And so I shut it down. And I remember doing that, and everybody was like, "What? What are we doing?" And I said, "We have to think beyond this." And we were blessed then by finding on High Street, which is the main artery through Columbus and actually runs parallel to campus, we were able to find a place called Cohatch. It's like WeWork. It's a co-working space where rented an office. And within that office, though, I have access to all the space in there. 3 times the space we ever had in our old student center for 1/4 the cost of what we used to spend. And so then I asked,
Wow.
all right, so now I have access to this office. It's stunning. It's beautiful. It's modern. It's very trendy. There's water on tap, including sparkling water. There's coffee 24 hours a day. There's scanners at the door. There's greeters that work at Cohatch. Like, it's like all the things that I could not afford to do myself are now set up there. And it's a block down from the student center. And so we've been there now for 4 years. And so I'll go in there in the day and I'll work, but I also am around people that are not Christians. And so my students will come in and engage with people, and they'll see our Bible studies on Tuesday nights that we host there and invite others to come and join us because it's right down the street. And so that was a start over and let's see what we can find type of scenario. And I'll just be honest, I didn't know that place existed when I shut it down. I was kind of going on faith that we would find something else that would be a better. But the blessing is then I had elders who I said, so instead of cutting the budget because we're spending 1/4 of it, let me use what we used to have. So winning from, whatever it was, $20,000 or whatever it was that we're now saving, let me put that towards food, towards community events, towards meals, towards marketing of different T-shirts and products and things like that we could put out there at no cost to students so that they start walking around our campus kind of branding everything we're doing. Let's think differently about this. So we did not raise the budget at all, but we quadrupled our impact on what we were doing simply because we just changed facility, as weird as it was. Now, that doesn't mean we got everything right, but it does mean that we tried to do something different. And it's been just such a blessing. Now, when it comes to youth ministry, it's a little bit harder because youth ministries are terrible about doing new things. In fact, you'll always hear, well, this is what we've always gone to this event. And I always want to go, okay, well, is it still doing what it did before? Is it still having that same impact? So one of the great examples, CYC is one of my favorite events in the world. I love CYC. It's fantastic. I do the graphics and media for them. They're wonderful, wonderful people. The amount of prayer and planning that goes into that event. And CYC is one of those events that a lot of people do year in and year out. But I know for a fact that the people who plan CYC spend a lot of time trying to make sure that people are growing spiritually, not just attending an event. That there's a difference between those two. Years ago, I was at a church and they had been going to do a youth, it was like a week-long mission trip up to a state. I want to say it was Wisconsin or something like that. And I remember asking the question, so what do we do when I got there? What do we do when we go up there? They said, well, we're teaching them how to do a VBS. And I said, oh, well, that's great. Well, how long have we been doing it? And I was expecting a year or two. It was like 12 years. I went, either they're terrible at learning or we're terrible at teaching. How are they doing this for 12 years and they still haven't figured out how to do a VBS?
Yeah.
And then when I started talking to the kids, it was about the location they stayed at and how much fun they had together. But it wasn't about the actual ministry itself. And so changing that, though, was like attacking a golden calf. It was something that was highly problematic. And so this is the key thing. If you're going to change something, you got to be ready for the fights. You got to be ready for the battles. And you never want to change anything just to change something. That's a bad habit some ministers have too. But if you're going into something, you should always have, am I being faithful to God? Are we being faithful to God? Is it doing what we're planning on it doing? Does it do that? In fact, you should evaluate every event every year. Is it doing what we still want it to do? And that doesn't go just for youth ministry. That should go for your education ministry. It should go for your preaching schedule. It should go for all those things. Is this having the impact that we want it to have? And the metrics, and here's the key thing. I tell this youth minister all the time. The size of your youth group means nothing. Zero. Numbers mean nothing except for they mean two things. They mean souls and they mean stories. That's it. If they mean anything else to you, if the youth, this is where I pointed out, if elderships or the rest were looking and say, well, our youth group's not growing right now, I always want to go, what do you mean by that? Because the role of the minister is typically spiritual and it's parents and the rest. So there could be other outside factors. So if it's just numbers you're looking at, that's a problem. That's a problematic mentality. It's also a problematic mentality if you have no growth consistently. So do you see there's this balancing that has to take place? And the way that you balance this is when your mentality is in, are we being faithful to God, not successful, faithful to God? And are we actually connecting with people where I can remember stories and people that I've connected with? That's the key metric. And what happens with that is, I've seen it over and over again, churches explode in growth. They explode in growth because the things that matter are what's actually being focused on, not just we're the biggest youth group or we're the biggest this or we go to all these big events. Instead, it's no. None of that matters. All that matters is, are we reaching our community? Are we communicating clearly? Does our youth group feel like a cohesive unit? And maybe this is the last thing I'll say on this. You have to create a church culture within your youth group where everyone's welcomed. And that's not just a platitude. It's not just a weird critical theory concept of identity and the rest. It's quite literally where your culture exists to support the students in their spiritual growth, which means I've never once had to teach a teenager how to have fun, ever. My job was not to create fun events. My job was to grow them, help them grow spiritually, provide them opportunities to grow. I used to tell the students, you tell me what you want to do to have fun. I'll make sure we have moments like that. My job, though, is to get you to come and show up to these things that will help you grow spiritually. And if I can align those, even better. But my job is not just the fun of it. It's not just lock-ins. It's not just those things. It's Bible class matters. In fact, I made a big deal. Wednesday nights matter. And so I made our gatherings together, Bible classes. I spent hours in preparation just for Wednesday nights because Sundays they were going to show up. Mom and dad was going to drag them. But if I can get them Wednesday nights, that became part of their culture. And that culture breeds upon itself over and over again. We had more students attending on Wednesday nights than we did on Sunday mornings. And then that ultimately it changed to where it was matching. But if you can get them on Wednesday nights where they can't wait but to be there, that changes everything culturally.
It sure does.
Absolutely.
It sure does. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you being our first victim of a chaotic order interview. We appreciate that very much. I want you to take a minute, if you don't mind, to tell us what you got going on. Tell us about Street Saints and anything else that might help people follow your work.
Sure. So I'm on all social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, X, all of the above. And myself and my dear friend Jovan Payes, we were in school together at Freed Hardman many, many years ago, have put together a new podcast that's coming out. It'll probably be about a week or two from now, where the first episode will come out. He is a former street gang member who found Christ in the most fascinating of ways. If you want to hear his story, it's in the Gospel Advocate, a lot of different things, but now the Dean of Students at Faulkner University. There's no better man I know out there for that type of role, to help students come through the difficulties of life and learn discipline along the way than a guy who's literally grew up on the streets and now is an academic in his own right. Just a brilliant man. And so my own background, obviously, is I grew up in Italy, missionary kid, and so we created this podcast called Street Saints. And so it's the premise of the kind of the old world, my concepts of life and art and literature and beauty and academia, and then his, which is the street side, but also in the academia. But I also grew up in I didn't grow up in the typical churches of Christ. I grew up in mission field churches of Christ in a different land. So we have some different views on things, and we're going to be discussing. In fact, one of the quotes I mentioned earlier is our first one is feelings, feelings, and feelings. Let us try thinking instead. It's the whole entire podcast on the thought, on thinking, on what it means to spend time in thought, to meditate on God's word, to think upon it, to have discussions that are open-ended with people, learning the art of thinking in and of itself. And so it's meant for anyone, but it's college and young professionals is kind of our target audience of what we encourage people. But honestly, it'll probably be just for about anybody that's out there. I also have my brother and I do summer tours. We take people on what we call spiritual tourism over to Italy. And so my brother owns a hotel over there. And so we've got some trips lined up. And so I'll be heading over that way in about 2 months for about 3 weeks, taking 120 people for 3 weeks across Italy and Rome and Florence, and showing them the beauty of life and the beauty also of the early church and faith and walking in the footsteps of Paul through Rome. So that's kind of our premise. That's what I've got going on. And more than anything, I'm grateful for you guys and for what y'all do. These types of things, even in their onset at the beginning, you never know how God will change these things. I told you once, I sat down and I invited students over to my apartment to watch a movie. And from there, 6,000 people in North Korea were saved. So you just never know how these things will come about. And so I'm grateful for the untold stories that have yet to happen that will come from these types of things. So I'm just grateful to have been part of it.
God bless you, my brother. We appreciate it. And please tell Kristen we said hello.
Will do.
And God bless you and your family as well.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.